Tonight we begin with the story of Byjus. From a superstar on the Indian startup scene to a cautionary tale, the company and its founder have seen quite the crash. They're being investigated by the Enforcement Directorate of India. They owe money to the Indian Cricket Board. The debt is piling and now Byju Raveendran, the founder, has pledged his homes to pay salaries. We'll tell you what this means. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin is heading to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. On the agenda are oil and West Asian politics. Ukraine is running out of funds and aid from America and Europe may stop. Does this mean the war will end? We'll discuss that. In the other war, it seems like Hamas not only attacked Israel, they also shorted it. We'll explain. Kenyan President Ruto is in India. A report on why this visit is significant. Has the junta lost the plot in Myanmar? Why is India slipping in the global talent rankings? What is the UK Home Secretary doing in Rwanda? Can he revive the deportation deal? And a new study says wishing strangers good morning can transform your life. But first, the headlines. Moody's downgrades China. The outlook on China's credit rating has gone from stable to negative. The reason for the cut is the rising debt in the world's second largest economy. China is also battling a massive housing crisis and record youth unemployment. A Nigerian army drone kills more than 80 civilians by mistake. The drone was targeting armed groups in the northwest Kaduna state. President Bola Tinubu orders a probe amid outrage over this incident. This is one of Nigeria's deadliest military bombing accidents. Iranian President Raisi will meet Vladimir Putin in Russia on Thursday. Putin visited Tehran in July last year. Both countries are looking to bolster economic and military ties amid Western sanctions. Iran has been accused of supplying weapons to Russia in its war against Ukraine. In India, cyclone Mikjom makes landfall in Andhra Pradesh amid heavy rain. In Chennai, at least 12 people are dead in rain-related incidents. Actor Amir Khan and badminton player Jwala Gutta rescued from their flood-hit homes. Chennai Airport resumes operations. European Union approves ban on destroying unsold clothing. The new rules crack down on fast fashion in a bid to reduce waste. The law, when it comes into force, will ban destroying unsold textiles and footwear. And Indian siblings make history. Pragnananda and Vaishali are the first brother-sister duo to become chess grandmasters. In 2018, Pragnananda became the youngest grandmaster at the age of 12. His sister Vaishali is the third Indian woman to become a chess grandmaster. In India, your house has a special role to play. It's not just a place where you live, it's a lot more. Buying a house is the first priority for many Indians. Selling or pledging it is the last resort. And that's where Byju Raveendran is at, the founder and CEO of Byjus. Reports say he has pledged 2 of his houses, both of them in Bengaluru. They've been offered up as collateral. In return, he has taken a loan of $12 million US. It tells you how bad things are. In July last year, Byju Raveendran was worth $3.6 billion. He was on the Forbes billionaires list. And now, he's pledging his house to pay his employees. Of course, the company has not confirmed this, neither has Byju Raveendran himself. But reports say the loan was used to pay 15,000 employees. In simple words, the company is cash-strapped. You need money to keep a firm running. Byju does not have that right now. But pledging houses is not a long-term solution. You can't just pile loans on loans, especially if you're Byju Raveendran. Reports say he has already pledged his shares in the company. He raised around $400 million from that. He's also sold some of his stake in Byjus. That brought in another $800 million. So it's not just the firm. Byjus, the company, and Byju, the man, both are short on money. So what's the way out? First, the legal issues have to be sorted out. Byjus is facing 3 major cases. The first is from the BCCI, the Indian Cricket Board. They're accusing Byjus of defaulting payments. Of how much? Around 158 crore rupees, which is around $18 million. You see, Byjus had a branding deal with the BCCI. They sponsored the Indian jersey. It started in 2019. It was supposed to last until the end of this year, 2023. But last year, Byju's pulled out. They simply had no money left, so they pulled out. So the BCCI had to find last-minute replacements. This 158 crore covers that period. Now, the case has been filed at the NCLT, the National Company Law Tribunal, NCLT. Byju says they want to resolve this issue amicably, so I guess they plan to pay up. The second case involves the ED, that is the Enforcement Directorate. It's also a much more serious case. The ED sent a notice to Byju's last month. And what did it say? That the company violated India's foreign exchange rules. We're talking about a lot of money here. More than 9,000 crore rupees. An investigation is currently underway. There could be a fine at the end of it. And finally, the third legal case, arguably the most important one. Byju's owes around $1.2 billion to lenders abroad. $1.2 billion. These lenders have sued the company. Why? Because interest has not been paid. That's $1.2 billion is the biggest challenge for Byju's. Unless it is repaid, there is no comeback. So what is the plan? In September, Byju's reached a deal with the lenders. They promised full repayment in 6 months, out of which 300 million would be paid within 3 months, meaning by December, this month. And how will Byju's manage that? Reports say by selling off key assets like reading platform Epic and Great Learning. If all goes well, Byju's could earn $1 billion from those sales, just short of the loan amount. But that's not even half the job done. Paying off loans is not a business strategy, it is survival. The question is, does Byju's have a plan beyond that, a comeback plan? Their AGM is scheduled for December 20th. AGM is the annual general meeting. We should have more clarity by then. But honestly, only a miracle can save this company. It's the classic Icarus tale of expanding too fast, of taking too many loans, and of flying too close to the sun. I don't think a comeback is on Byju Raveendran's mind at this point. He'll be more worried about bankruptcy. Between the BCCI and the Enforcement Directorate and the lenders, it's like a patient with AIDS, cancer and pneumonia. The question is, who will drive the final nail? Some geopolitics now. Vladimir Putin is on the move. He's making a rare foreign trip amid the war in Ukraine. And where is he going? Well, 2 countries, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. The trip is expected to begin tomorrow. He will first travel to the UAE and then to Saudi Arabia. Now, why is this trip important? Well, like I said, it's a rare one. Putin has visited 9 countries since the war in Ukraine began. 9 countries. 7 of them are former Soviet states. The exceptions are China and Iran. But now Vladimir Putin is venturing further. He is traveling to key allies of the United States, Saudi Arabia and the UAE. What does that mean? Perhaps he's feeling more confident, which brings us to the agenda of this trip. What unites Russia, Saudi Arabia and the UAE? What's the common factor? Oil. All 3 are part of the group called OPEC+. It's a cartel of oil-producing countries. Last week, they announced a major decision. They agreed to voluntarily cut their oil output. By how much? Around 2.2 million barrels per day. That's the cut that they announced, 2.2 million barrels per day. The idea here is to prop up oil prices. In late September, Brent crude was trading at around $94 per barrel. By mid-November, it had fallen to $77. OPEC Plus wants to change that. And what better way than cutting output? It's simple economics. If you reduce output, prices will go up. But has that happened? Well, not yet. The markets are not convinced by the oil cuts. In fact, Brent crude slipped 2% after the cuts were announced. And the reason is quite simple. The economic mood is gloomy. No one is expecting a massive demand for oil, which is why Putin is traveling to the Gulf. He needs to chalk out a strategy that will keep oil money flowing into the treasury. And the Kremlin has confirmed this. They say oil is very much on the agenda. Listen in.
These discussions are held within the OPEC Plus format, but of course, cooperation in this area is always on the agenda. The fact is there are certain processes of inertia in the oil market. It is very big and heavy. Therefore, sometimes the effect is delayed. Therefore, coordination will continue.
In Saudi Arabia, Putin will hold talks with MBS, that's Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Both men have a good working relationship, Putin and MBS. It dates back to late 2016. Oil prices were in the dumps then. OPEC alone was unable to make a difference. So other oil states came together to form what we call OPEC Plus. MBS and Putin were key to those talks. And this time, they'll be hoping for some of that magic. Because 2024 does not look good for oil states. Economic growth is projected to be sluggish. China's growth is not picking up, so oil demand will likely be low. And that's bad news for countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia. Just look at these numbers. Oil and gas makes up 28% of Russia's revenue. In Saudi Arabia, oil makes up 40% of the GDP. Hence the worry. If oil collapses, all these countries suffer. Putin and MBS will be keen to avoid that. Having said that, it's not just about oil. There is politics involved as well. Putin is traveling to West Asia at a very crucial time, at a time of crisis. Israel has resumed its offensive on Gaza. Most Arab nations are losing patience with the US. They feel President Joe Biden is not doing enough, that he is only supporting Israel and not Palestine. So the atmosphere is perfect. Putin can nudge Gulf states away from the United States. They may not abandon Washington, but they can be neutral states. In fact, in many ways, they already are. Russians are now parking their money in the UAE. They can't buy assets in the US or in Europe, so they're shifting to the Gulf. Just consider real estate. Russians were the leading buyers of UAE properties in 2022. Some realtors reported a 125% rise. Russian companies are also shifting base, like Lukoil. It's the second biggest energy company in Russia. Last year, it moved its trading operations outside Europe, from Switzerland to Dubai. So the Gulf has become a new safe haven for Russians, for oligarchs, for Russian firms, even for Vladimir Putin. Somewhere he can travel and hold talks without fear. Of course, it's a two-way street. The Gulf states are keen to welcome wealthy visitors. They bring in money for a post-oil future. But will this alliance of convenience translate into something strategic, something long-term? Tomorrow's meetings could give us some clues. And staying with the Russian president, his bet on Ukraine is finally paying off. It's taken more than 600 days, but it is happening. Western countries are losing interest in the war. Their funding is about to stop. If it does, it's game over for Kiev. Let's start with their biggest supporter, the United States of America. They've given some $40 billion in military aid to Ukraine so far. That's $40 billion in 2 years. But US lawmakers say no more, especially the Republican ones. Joe Biden had presented a budget plan to the US Congress. He asked for $106 billion. It included funds for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Now, the Congress did give money to Israel, but on Ukraine, they said no. Republicans have been pushing an America First policy, meaning no spending on foreign wars. What does that mean for Ukraine's war effort? Well, a White House official has written to congressional leaders, and her warning is pretty dire. Let me quote, "If US financial support ends, it would kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield, not only putting at risk the gains Ukraine has made, but increasing the likelihood of Russian military victories. In simpler words, Ukraine will lose. And there is no backup fund for support. The Pentagon has used up 97% of its allotted funds. The State Department has used up 100%. So by the end of this year, aid will stop. There will be no more money to give."
Without congressional action, the administration will run out of resources by the end of the year to procure more weapons and equipment for Ukraine and to provide equipment from U.S. military stocks without impacting our own military readiness. Congress has to decide whether to continue to support the fight for freedom in Ukraine as part of the 50-nation coalition that President Biden has built, or whether Congress will ignore the lessons we've learned from history and let Putin prevail.
Without US aid, it's just a matter of time. Kiev could fall within weeks or months, which brings us to two important questions. One, can Congress still strike a deal? And two, what about Ukraine's allies in Europe? Well, Congress can strike a deal. We've seen last-minute talks on debt ceiling. No reason the same cannot happen for Ukraine. Plus, the Republicans have shown their cards. They want tougher immigration and border laws. If they get that, they will greenlight the money. So it's a question of negotiating hard, a question of who blinks first. As for the second question, the answer is more complicated. In the US, you have to convince 2 parties. In Europe, you have to convince 27. That's how many members the EU has. And right now, they're negotiating a budget. It includes a $54 billion fund for Ukraine. It's a long-term fund. The idea is to keep Ukraine afloat until 2027. Just one problem, though. Not everyone is on board. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban is opposing the proposal. He's pulling an Erdogan in the EU, using his position to gain an advantage. You see, Brussels is supposed to give $24 billion to Hungary. Orban needs that money, $24 billion. But the EU leadership has put a freeze on it. They say Hungary has rule of law issues. Fix that first and then take the money. So what does Viktor Orban do? He flips the strategy. He threatens to block the EU budget instead. It's a classic case of brinkmanship. But for Ukraine, it's a matter of survival. The winter has already set in. Russia has begun striking Ukraine's energy infrastructure. If foreign funding stops, Kiev will fall. And Putin knows this. In fact, he knew it all along. Putin was betting on Western support and unity to crumble. He was right about that. What he got wrong was the timetable. Does that mean it's game over? Well, today is the 5th of December. We have an entire month before time runs out. And in politics, 1 month can be a long time. The Congress could still strike a new deal. The EU could still accommodate Hungary. So the war is not over just yet. But it has exposed the drawbacks of this Western alliance, of how fragile the support is. The regime in Kiev should take note of that. From one war to another, Hamas attacked Israel on the 7th of October. It's been nearly 2 months. Now, we all know how the attack happened. What we don't know is, how did Israel not see it coming? There were many signs, many warnings, and one of them apparently appeared on the stock markets. It was first mentioned in a research paper. Now, the attack, as we know, happened on the 7th of October, but 5 days before that, on the 2nd of October, something strange happened. Someone took a bet against the Israeli economy. They began short selling Israeli securities. And when the war broke out, they made a profit. Essentially, they walked away with a lot of money. What does this mean and why is this important? To answer this, we must answer a basic question first. What exactly is short selling? Now listen to this carefully. Imagine your friend has a toy and it costs around 10 rupees. You borrow that toy from your friend and sell it. So now you have 10 rupees. And you're also sure that the price of this toy will fall. Eventually it does. It does fall. The price falls to 5 rupees. And that's when you buy it back. You buy it for 5 rupees and then return the toy to your friend. So here's what you did. You borrowed a 10 rupee toy, sold it for 10 rupees, and bought it for 5 rupees. Essentially, you've made a profit of 5 rupees. That's how short selling works. Instead of toys, you do it with stocks. You start selling stocks that you know are going to fall. And this is what happened in Israel. Someone shorted Israeli securities, and they did it in very large numbers. The study looked at the Israel Exchange Traded Fund. Israelis use this fund to make investments. On any normal day, around 2,000 shares are shorted on this exchange. That's the normal level, 2,000 shares. But on the 2nd of October, it was around 227,000 shares. 227,000 shares were shorted. For example, take the shares of the Leumi Bank. It's Israel's largest bank. Between September 14th and October 5th, 4.43 million new shares of this bank were sold short. And it was done by one trader. When Hamas attacked Israel, the bank's share price dropped almost 9%. So whoever shorted the stock made a lot of money off it. How much? Some $740,000. And this is just one case. What does this mean? It means that someone knew, or a bunch of people knew, that the attack was going to happen. So they bet against the Israeli economy, and when the attack did happen, they made money, a lot of it. Which brings us to the obvious question, who were these traders? How did they know that an attack was imminent? The obvious guess is that these are people linked to Hamas. They were planning the attack and they wanted to make money off it. And what is Israel doing about this? They say they're investigating. But why wasn't anyone monitoring all of this? A sudden and sharp rise in short selling, and no one raises a red flag. And apparently this has never happened before. Not before the 2014 war, not before the pandemic, not even before the judicial overhaul protests. Such rampant short selling is a first of sorts for Israel. So it appears that Hamas not only attacked Israel, they also shorted them and earned millions of dollars in the process. But look at the cost of this. 60 days of war and counting, more than 15,000 people killed, including more than 6,000 children, Palestinians. After a few days of ceasefire, the bombing has resumed. Israel's ground operation is targeting South Gaza now, and Gazans have nowhere to go. They fled the north to relative or notional safety in the south, but now the south is under attack. Look at Khan Yunis, a city in southern Gaza. Israel has declared it a quote-unquote dangerous combat zone. This is the second largest city in the Gaza Strip, home to more than 440,000 people. Israel says they must leave. But where will they go? They're not allowed to leave Gaza. They cannot go to the north, so they're trapped. Israel says the war will go on until Hamas is destroyed. But that's not a measurable target, the destruction of Hamas. And for the people of Gaza, it's the death sentence. For our next story, let's look at Kenya. In 2017, Indians became the 44th tribe in the country. But while the recognition may have come recently, the Indian diaspora in Kenya can be traced back to the 17th century. Even today, it's a robust community. Nearly 100,000 people of Indian origin live in Kenya, which makes it the second largest Indian community in Africa. But why are we talking about all of this tonight? Because Kenyan President William Ruto is in India. He's on a 3-day state visit, his first visit to the country as president. Our next report tells you why this visit is a significant one.
It was the 1700s. British rule was being cemented in India. Business was expanding. Plus, the British had infrastructural needs. After all, they had an empire to control. So Indians started coming to East Africa. Some for business, some for service in the British Army, and others to build railways and other services. Fast forward 3 centuries, and Indians are now the 44th tribe in Kenya. It's a big community with close to 100,000 people. It's also an influential one. They came to the East African nation, enjoyed economic success, and ended up living there for generations. And it's these people-to-people ties that bolstered India-Kenya relations. Today, Kenyan President William Ruto is in India. It's a 3-day state visit, his first as President of Kenya. There was a ceremonial welcome at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, followed by a visit to the Rajghat, where Ruto paid his respects to Mahatma Gandhi. This is the first Kenyan presidential visit in 6 years, so it's obviously a special one.
I want to report to you that in 2017, all the Indian nationals that are in Kenya were made Kenyan citizens. Today, Kenya is no longer their second home. Kenya is their first home. And we celebrate them because they are a great people and they have created a bridge between Kenya and India. Because of that relationship, we have had a long history of collaboration, and today in my visit we have consolidated that relationship and expanded the scope of engagement between our governments.
The focus is on strengthening these ties. But there's a lot more on the plate, like investments. India will provide Kenya with a $250 million credit line. This is to modernize its agriculture sector. Both India and Kenya are agrarian economies. So this is important. Plus, there's the issue of terrorism. It's affecting both India and Kenya. President William Ruto said it himself.
Terrorism is a big issue both for Kenya and India, and we've agreed that our defense forces will work together in collaboration, sharing information, sharing experience, sharing knowledge and intelligence to make sure that we deal with the challenge of terrorism.
So the two countries are looking at closer cooperation. Both Indian and Kenyan defense forces will share information, experience and intelligence to deal with the issue.
केन्या और भारत का करीबी सहयोग इंडो पैसिफिक उसमें हमारे सभी प्रयासों को बल देगा। भारत और केन्या एकमत है कि आतंकवाद मानवता के लिए सबसे गंभीर चुनौती है। इस संबंध में हमने काउंटर टेररिज्म के क्षेत्र में आपसी सहयोग को बढ़ाने का निर्णय लिया है।
And then there's trade. India is one of Kenya's largest trading partners. President Ruto will also attend a business investment summit here in India. So the idea is to attract more investment. India and Kenya signed 5 MOUs on agriculture, healthcare and other sectors. So this visit is an important one. The emphasis is on boosting existing ties and building the India-Kenya relationship. The two countries already share a colonial past, and they now look forward to sharing a future of friendship and cooperation.
Now let's turn to India's eastern neighbour, Myanmar. The military regime in Myanmar is on the back foot. Fighting has been going on for more than a month now. 3 rebel groups joined forces to form what they call the Brotherhood Alliance. They're leading the offensive against the military junta. They started in the northeastern state of Shan. It began as localized fighting, but now it has spread to almost every region of Myanmar. The Brotherhood Alliance has met with success, and this has encouraged other rebel groups. They've joined the fight against the junta. On the other side is the Myanmar army, losing ground rapidly. Reports say more than 200 junta bases have been overrun. A large number of weapons have been looted. Morale in Myanmar's army is low. Troops are surrendering in waves. Some have defected and joined the rebel groups. And many soldiers continue to seek refuge in India. So what are the junta's top generals doing? Playing the blame game. Here's what the generals say. The radical ethnic youth are the troublemakers here. They're the ones who broke the ceasefire and they're disturbing the country's harmony. And that's not all. The junta says that foreigners are working for rebel groups. In what capacity? Apparently as drone experts. So the army says the rebels have hired foreign drone experts. And the most recent blame is on the banking staff. The generals say that bankers in Myanmar are giving state funds to rebels. But what about the Myanmar army? Why has it failed to stop all of this? And what is the junta doing about it? They're calling them back to duty. Announcements have been made for soldiers who had deserted or gone AWOL, absent without leave. They've all been asked to return to their barracks. Even veterans are being recalled. If they do not turn up, they'll lose their pension. The junta has threatened to suspend pensions. Now, all of these sound like desperate measures. For the first time since the coup, the junta is facing an existential threat. They've been fighting rebel forces for decades and they've almost always been successful. But this time, it looks tough. The junta has their backs against the wall. Though they're not done yet, they've launched a massive fight back against the rebels. There are reports of fighter jets dropping cluster munition, and the number of bombings is increasing. The military junta is pushing back hard, and the rebels know this.
The military can't defeat us on the ground, so they have used many airstrikes and heavy weapons to take control of Loikao. The military have lost many soldiers, and they are weak right now. We are only afraid of the airstrikes.
The airstrikes have slowed down the rebels, but they haven't stalled the fighting. Townships are still being taken over by them in the northern Sagaing state. There is already a change in leadership. The junta has been replaced. This is in a town called Kolin, one of the largest townships in the state. Rebel groups have installed civilian leadership there. Kolin has become the first district-level town to return to civilian rule. But this has come at a cost. The fighting has left most of the towns deserted.
Loikao residents have fled from the township and only 3 or 4 out of 14 town quarters still have some civilians there. And we can say 70% of Loikao's population are displaced right now.
Hundreds of thousands have been displaced and the fighting seems to be nowhere near an end. Rebel groups are confident Myanmar's military is struggling to fight on multiple fronts. The junta's top general blames ethnic groups for this. He's calling on the rebels to solve their problems politically. This is the military junta saying, solve your problems politically. But he made no mention of the discontent against the military regime. The situation is precarious. Myanmar faces an uncertain future and its neighbors are being drawn into this chaos. India has already opened its doors to refugees. Thailand too has taken in hundreds. China, on the other hand, wants nothing to do with this mess. They've carried out a short live-fire military exercise near the border with Myanmar and now they've closed their doors. The international community remains silent and caught in the middle are civilians who continue to suffer. Vantage continues after a short break. Let's turn to the United Kingdom. They have a bold plan to deport asylum seekers. Their Home Secretary is in Rwanda. His name is James Cleverly. He is signing a new and controversial agreement, a deal that allows Britain to send thousands of refugees to Rwanda. It's a desperate attempt to reduce the influx of migrants. It's part of Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's refugee policy. The UK Supreme Court has already ruled against it. They've called it a violation of international human rights. But that's not stopping London. This new treaty will allow them to deport thousands of asylum seekers to Rwanda. In return, the African nation will receive millions of dollars. And the world is watching this, especially European states. Many of them are facing a migration crisis of their own. So is this the new getaway card for Europe's problems? Here's our report.
Europe is facing a migration crisis. Millions are fleeing West Asia and Africa. These refugees are landing up on Europe's borders. And this has become a major concern for many governments. Europe is struggling to stop the inflow of migrants. And the United Kingdom is resorting to some controversial strategies. Britain wants to deport thousands of refugees to the African nation of Rwanda. And Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is not backing down. It all started in 2022. The British government announced that anyone entering the UK illegally would be deported to Rwanda. The first deportation flight, which was scheduled to fly out, was cancelled due to legal challenges. And then began a long trial. Last month, UK's Supreme Court ruled against the government. They called the deportation plan unlawful and a violation of international human rights. But the Sunak government was quick to find ways around the ruling.
Today, the Supreme Court has judged that the Rwanda policy requires a set of changes in order to be lawful. I do not agree with this decision, but I respect it and accept it. The rule of law is fundamental to our democracy. We have prepared for all outcomes of this case. And so we have been working on a new international treaty with Rwanda. This will provide a guarantee in law that those who are relocated from the UK to Rwanda will be protected against removal from Rwanda.
Now the UK is signing a new binding treaty with Rwanda. Britain's Home Secretary James Cleverly is in the African nation. The treaty will allow the UK to deport thousands of refugees to Rwanda. In return, Rwanda will get millions of dollars for housing the refugees. But why is Britain deporting thousands of refugees to Rwanda? The UK is facing a migration crisis unlike ever before. In 2022, over 45,000 people entered the UK, their highest figures ever. This is also having an impact on the economy. The UK spends close to $4 billion every year on refugees. Over $10 million are spent every day just to house asylum seekers in hotels. Clearly, the refugee crisis is burning a hole in the UK's pockets.
I'm very clear that the levels of migration are too high and they've got to come down to more sustainable levels. I've been clear about that.
So now they will send refugees to Rwanda. But why Rwanda of all countries? UK's Home Minister says that Rwanda cares deeply about the rights of refugees. Take that with a pinch of salt. But it looks like Rwanda has no problem taking in thousands of asylum seekers, as long as they keep getting paid millions of dollars for it. This controversial treaty is being watched by other European nations as well. That's because Britain is not the only country facing a migrant crisis. Italy, Spain and Greece are also seeing refugees land up on their shores in the thousands. If the deal between Rwanda and the UK goes through, it may not take long before other European nations sign similar treaties and just buy their way out of the refugee crisis.
Ask any type A person and they'll say lists are good. But you know what's better? Rankings. They tell us where we stand and what we can do to get better. One such ranking is the Global Talent Competitiveness Index. It looks at how countries grow, attract and retain talent. The term talent here refers to high-performing employees. Every country needs them. But who has the most talent? Well, rich nations, obviously. They dominate the talent landscape. Among them, Switzerland tops the index every year. But developing nations are making large strides. This year, the largest were made by Indonesia among Asian countries. Indonesia climbed 14 spots in 1 year to the 80th rank. What about India? India has slid sharply. It is the worst ranking among BRICS nations. Out of 134 nations, India stands at 103. Our next report tells you why.
Maya Angelou once said, "I believe that every person is born with talent." That's a generous thought. It may even be true, but capitalism strongly disagrees. It claims only the best of human capital qualifies as talent. Confused? Let's explain. In the context of the workforce, talent refers to high-performing and high-potential employees. Every country needs them. They are hard-working, high-reaching workers, but not all countries have them equally. So, who's got the talent? That's not a question for a reality show, but for the Global Talent Competitiveness Index. This is an annual list covering 134 countries. It looks at how countries grow, attract, and retain talent. According to this index, rich nations have always dominated the talent landscape. Switzerland tops the index every year. This year was no different. It got the best of human capital's creamy layer, followed by Singapore, America, Denmark, the Netherlands, Finland, Norway, Australia, Sweden, and the UK. But all hope is not lost. Developing nations are making big strides too. The largest was made by Indonesia among Asian countries. It climbed 14 spots in the last 5 years. It's quite the jump. Indonesia achieved this by improving the quality of life and job sustainability. But not all Asian countries were as lucky. Like India, it received the worst ranking among BRICS nations. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. India is ranked at 103. It's sandwiched between Algeria and Guatemala. Remember, we're talking about the world's most populous nation, an economic powerhouse. But countries like Rwanda, Paraguay, Tunisia, Namibia, Bolivia, Ghana, and Gambia are all ranked higher than India. This isn't a good look for the world's fifth largest economy. But why is this? According to the report, India is not able to attract talent domestically. People under the age of 25 account for more than 40% of the population, but almost half of them were unemployed last year. According to reports, about 40% of recruiters in India face challenges in finding the right talent for the right job. But that's not all. This problem goes beyond India's borders. India is not being able to attract talent from overseas either. On top of that, there's the problem of high attrition. According to reports, the median attrition rate of broad-based index or the BSE 100 firms in India stood at 17% this year. Studies say that if India wants to hit the $4 trillion economy mark, it needs to add about 100 million workers. This is a big ask, but it's not impossible. India is brimming with potential. It has produced world-renowned education centers, also some of the world's top bosses, including Microsoft's Satya Nadella and Alphabet's Sundar Pichai. This shows that the situation is not entirely bleak. It simply needs a pick-me-up. And it may sound ironic, but if India needs to cultivate talent, it must work hard.
For our next story, let me tell you about a modern-day paradox. Most people have one thing in common: feeling alone. The World Health Organization agrees. Last month, it designated loneliness as a global public health concern. Loneliness increases the risk of early death by 39%. It is as damaging as consuming 15 cigarettes a day. We told you about this. It's as lethal as consuming 6 alcoholic drinks a day. At any given time, loneliness affects 1 in 4 people the world over. It shouldn't be this way, especially because we know what to do about it. The answer is social relationships. The quality of our relationships affects our well-being. They are an overwhelmingly strong indicator of happiness. Relationships are a very strong indicator of happiness. A hefty body of research has proven this time and again. But there is a blind spot. Most of these studies look at only close ties like family, friends, and co-workers. But in the past 2 decades, a new area of study has emerged. It looks at something that can complement close relationships: strangers. Scientists have begun to wonder if talking to strangers is good for us too. And the results are striking. A new study is out. It says that talking to strangers can lead to greater life satisfaction. Even a simple good morning can transform lives. Morning person or not, it can make people feel valued. And that is considered a fundamental human need, to be valued. But this is not all. Several studies show that talking to strangers can make us happier, mentally sharper, healthier, optimistic, and make us feel more connected. And this is true for both parties, those who initiate the conversation and those who partake in it. Both benefit. So governments have jumped on this bandwagon too. Last month, a Swedish city introduced the Say Hello campaign with advertisements on buses and workshops in schools, all nudging people to say hello to strangers. Meanwhile, countries like the UK, Sweden, Ireland and Australia have adopted a chatty bench. It's a park bench where strangers can talk to each other. The campaign is quirky, but the idea is quite simple. Building connections with strangers is important for our social fabric. And this is not news. For centuries, most religious faiths have had similar messaging: to welcome the strangers we encounter. And in India, this is the foundation of a unique tradition of hospitality. We say, no guest is lesser than a god. But the question then remains, if talking to strangers is so pleasant and beneficial, why don't we do it more often? For starters, two words: stranger danger. Over the past few decades, this message has become all the rage across the world. Parents, teachers, police officers, politicians, practically everyone set aside their differences and spread the singular rhyming message. They agree that interacting with a stranger could put you at risk. So children are taught never to speak to unknown adults. When they become grown-ups themselves, they follow this familiar pattern. And before we know it, strangers are cast as a threat. But you see, human beings by nature are trusting. If they weren't, people would never invest in stocks or use dating apps or keep their money in banks or allow their children to take up gymnastics. Which is why being wary has its perks, but doing it indiscriminately becomes a trap. The second reason why we don't engage with people is technology. It's a no-brainer. A few years ago, it was impossible to go through life without speaking to strangers. You had bus or cab drivers, baristas, receptionists, grocery store cashiers, or just people helping you find your way in a new city. But all that has changed, thanks to third-party shopping and restaurant apps, or cab features that allow you to mute your driver, or maps on your phone. So tech evolution has made us averse to strangers, with screens substituting for humans. It's almost dystopian. And it goes against our social contract. Talking to people, even strangers, isn't just good for us, it is necessary. Taking a leap of faith allowed humans to grow beyond a family unit or a tribe. And it's done well for us so far. So instead of boxing yourself up, take that leap of faith, start a conversation, and see where it takes you. Vantage continues after a short break. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In China, a black hole-like structure forms a frozen river in the country's northeast. In Rome, climate activists scale an oil company headquarters to protest against fossil fuels. And in the Czech Republic, Santa Claus is here. But don't expect him to be accompanied by elves or reindeers. Instead, he has the devil and grim reaper for company. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1952, a lethal smog blanketed the city of London. It was called the Great Smog. It lasted for a week and killed about 4,000 people. The smog prompted the British Parliament to pass the Clean Air Act. Leaving you on that note, thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Eccolo.
Very good evening. You're watching CNN News 18 with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Now, after BJP's landslide victory in the Hindi heartland, the North versus South debate seems to have escalated further. Earlier today, DMK MP Senthil Kumar took a jibe at BJP and said